G'day guys and gal. To nobody's surprise, the definition of a god is extremely hard to quantify. Is it a being of extreme power? Does it have to be omniscient? If it started as a mortal, does that disqualify it? Does it need to have sentience? Is there a special language or symbol it requires? You could argue many things are gods. For example, the Catan were considered the gods of reality, but also they seem to start off as unsentient jellyfish that ate stars, and only gained their godlike powers when large necrodermis robot statues were built for them to inhabit. But other than their immense power, what actually made them godlike? Was it because they were connected to reality itself? The chaos gods are often considered gods, I mean it's in the name, despite them being an amalgamation of countless emotions and actions, with many arguing they don't even have true sentience. However, the most worshipped god in the entire galaxy by far is the God Emperor of mankind, a guy with an eating disorder strapped to a throne with a car battery hooked up to his balls, more or less powering mankind's future. But is that what defines a god? The Emperor's godhood is honestly one of the most hotly debated topics both in and out of lore in 40k, so let's have some fun trying to create a definitive answer to the question. Before we get started, Black Friday for Major Minis is live right now, 40% off store-wide, the largest discount we have ever run. We can all agree that Major Mini sculpts are dope as hell. Yes, I am biased, but that doesn't make me wrong. The idea behind Major Minis wasn't to try to replace any official models or armies, it was to give you unique, awesome units you could use to enrich your army or build a new one around, or just have a cool sculpt to paint. All models are designed to fit into tabletop gaming with their scaling proportions. This isn't a backyard shed operation. We have dozens of 16K resolution printers, all blessed by the Omnissiah, using our own custom formula of 12K resin designed to be easy to work with and strong. We get compliments all the time on it, which is evident by our 5-star Etsy rating with over 1,000 verified reviews. The reason I reference Etsy reviews instead of the reviews on our website is because Etsy is a third-party platform, which means all reviews have to be genuine and from verified buyers, which is the same for our website, but for Etsy you don't have to take my word for it. There is genuinely a model on here for everyone. If you like the Marines from space, we have the Grey Slayer, the Wraith, Shark Daddy, the Lunar Wolf, Honorable Guardians, the Flesh Terror, and dozens more. If you like the Chaotic Legions, we have the Prince of Crows, the Hated One, Chaotic Lich Lord, the Sluzz Marines, and many, many more. We also have the Golden Guardians, which are some of our most popular, some Undead Robot Space Egyptians, a whole lot of Xenonids, some Orky Boys, the Raven Lord, Space Elves, the range goes on and on. Link to everything is below. At bare minimum, have a sus, the models are sick. Today we'll analyze the life and undeath of the Emperor to determine if he is a god or not, and if he is a god, at what point did he actually become one? Now let's get into it. Now the big irony of the Emperor is that he spent his whole living life telling everyone he wasn't a god, only for him now to be worshipped as one. Bit sad really. The Imperium was built on atheism, science above faith. Now this was a bit misleading. There was definitely things that fit the description of gods, with the warp being a realm of gods. However, the Emperor had a method to his madness. The Emperor wanted to make humanity ignorant to the gods of the warp, which would starve those gods and prevent people from seeking them out. This backfired pretty badly, but the idea behind it made sense. Now the Emperor was this destiny-bending, gigantic golden warrior with a flaming sword who was difficult to even be in the presence of, let alone look at. He was extremely godlike to the point where Lorga actually began worshipping him as a god and even wrote a book about it. Now as a Primarch, Lorga had an extremely high intellect which was based on logic. When he claimed the Emperor was a god, he did so not because of blind faith, but because the Emperor fit his definition of a god. If a near all-powerful immortal being who was a master of an entire race was bending the galaxy to his will, who could see the future and seemed infinitely wise existed, then would they not be a god? To Lorga it made complete sense, and the Emperor denying his divinity just affirmed his belief further. After all, only a true god would deny their godhood. Anyone who said, "Look at me, I'm a god," was just a wannabe. But was the Emperor actually a god here? Well, I would argue not, but he wasn't too far off. Demigod probably more appropriate. See, he was born as an exceptional man, the most powerful perpetual to exist, with perpetuals being immortal humans utterly immune to corruption that often possess unique special powers. The Emperor then further empowered himself through knowledge and science, but mostly from entering the stable warp gate on Molech, taking power from the warp and using it to create the Primarchs and also empower himself. It seems that the Molech power-up sort of primes a being with potential godhood. For example, Horus only really kicked into gear as a massive threat to the Emperor after he entered the Molech warp gate. If he never did that before going to Terra, the Emperor would have fucked him up in a one-sided 1v1. However, even with the Molech power-up, his perpetual powers, and all of his might, I do genuinely believe the Emperor was still a man here, an absolutely hectic man that could fuck shit up, but a man all the same. There were times before the heresy when he was genuinely in a pickle or even injured. For example, the Vortex vortex bomb terrorist attack that the Emperor's children saved him from. The lore states he was clearly injured here. A fucking bomb, even a vortex bomb, is not the Achilles heel of a god. Likewise, the orc that grabbed him that one time when Horus then saved him. An orc, no matter how big, cannot just grab and start crushing a god. No, the Emperor was dope, but he was not a god at this point in time. However, at the end of the Siege of Terror, the lines really started to blur. When the Emperor and his custodians teleported on board the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor was a blazing powerful warrior, but he was massively outclassed by Horus at this point. Horus managed to possess the custodians like puppets and make them attack their master, with some even landing blows on him. It took the Emperor some time to free his warriors of the possession, and he also struggled to keep the illusions of chaos out of their mind as they traveled through the ship. At this point, Horus was becoming a god, and the Emperor knew he had zero chance, so the Emperor too started becoming a god. He began absorbing an ungodly amount of power from the warp. Since the warp was so deeply saturated in everything, he had an infinite supply. The Emperor's power grew and grew, going from an ember to a flame to an inferno. He was so powerful he managed to turn each of his surviving custodians into demigod avatars of immense power, and they ripped their way through the ship, massacring tons of demons with little effort. The Emperor had begun ascending to godhood in a similar way to how Horus was. Now, at what point does a demigod become a true god in Warhammer 40k? Well, true gods have a very difficult time existing in real space without fucking everything up. The only known examples of this happening are the Catan, as they were the gods of reality, as well as the Eldar gods during the War in Heaven, who were used to fight the Catan. You could argue Slaanesh briefly was in real space upon her birth, but only for a moment to consume a ton of Eldar before she was ejected from real space. Slaanesh's brief time in real space tore open the Eye of Terror, and the shockwaves were felt across the entire galaxy. So you could argue that when a demigod becomes a god, they lose their grip on real space in most cases, as there are differences between warp gods and gods like the Catan. It also seems like gods in 40k need to be the god of something. Cain is the god of war, Slaanesh is the god of having too good of a time, and so on. The Emperor was becoming the Dark King, the god of ruin, and as such turned into this gigantic obsidian ball which radiated destruction all around it. In this form, he was powerful enough to crush Horus. However, he also would have completely ascended and more or less destroyed the entire galaxy. Obviously not ideal. So even as a gigantic floating obsidian orb of immense power, he still wasn't a god, but he was extremely close to becoming one. Now, when the Emperor dispelled the power of the Dark King, he entered a new powerful form. It was as powerful as the Emperor could get without godhood. Mortality stretched to the very edges of the definition, the top-ranking non-god creature in the galaxy. However, when he faced Horus with this form, Horus was a flick of a dick away from godhood. Like, if he killed the Emperor, it probably would have triggered his final ascension, so he was in a league above the Emperor. When they fought, the Emperor had to fight extremely dirty to stay in it. There was no honor on his behalf at all. Every chance the Emperor took to kick Horus in the balls, he took it. There was even a part where Horus beat the Emperor down and began dragging him to be nailed to a throne. The Emperor rested his hand on Horus's chest. Horus thought it was a fatherly gesture of submission. In reality, the Emperor was draining power from Horus to use against him. But again, the Emperor only took enough power to reach his peak mortal power. He refused to take enough to reignite the Dark King Ascension. The fight was actually really fascinating. No matter what the Emperor did, even landing the most insane blows on Horus and sundering his mortal shell, Horus's godlike status made him infinitely unkillable. It's like they both had a similar raw starting power, but the Emperor had extremely finite energy, whereas Horus had infinite energy. The only way Horus actually died was from being tricked into releasing his god power, making him immortal for a short time, which the Emperor exploited. The Emperor's broken body was placed on the Golden Throne, which kicks off his current God Emperor era. But obviously you don't just ascend to godhood from getting your shit kicked in, then placed on what is more or less a soul rape torture device. So how would the Emperor become a god now? Well, it's not something that happened overnight, and his godhood status is still in question. But here is what happened between the Emperor being interred on the Golden Throne and the current setting. 10,000 years of being worshipped by sextillions of humans, 10,000 years of having 1,000 psykers sacrificed to you per day, which equates to 3.65 billion psykers. That is an absolute fuckload of warp spaghetti getting force-fed into a single being, a being who we know is capable of godhood. Now, the irony is that despite all this power the Emperor has, he struggles to use it due to his shattered consciousness. However, the acts he can perform in this new godlike form are insane. For example, curing Guilliman of the God Blight and then setting Nurgle's Garden on fire. Hell, even stopping Guilliman's soul from entering the warp after Fulgrim slew him so that he could get revived later on was literal divine intervention. Creating the living saints, empowering the Legion of the Damned, faith being able to be manifested into weapons. These are all massive signs of the Emperor's godhood. When Guilliman spoke with the Emperor in the current setting, he said it was like talking to a star, all notions of emotion and mortality gone. After that, Guilliman really struggled to reconcile the Emperor's divinity. He'd been so adamant that the Emperor was a man and always a man, not a god. However, even he, the most pragmatic man in the galaxy, began to doubt the truth of that. He ran near constant theoretical and practicals in his head to try figure it out, all of which seemed to lead to the conclusion that the Emperor had become a god at some point in those 10,000 years. But if he became a god, why wasn't Terra ripped apart by his ascension? Well, it's usually the big fast ascensions that cause the most ruckus. The Emperor had 10,000 years to disperse his ascension, coupled with the fact that the Emperor has ensured his physical real space form form has remained as a weak, desecrated corpse, while his warp god self has remained in the warp where it can't harm real space. Perhaps the Terminus decree exists for this reason. If the Emperor was to get up off the Golden Throne, having a god in real space could ruin everything, so the Grey Knights would be instructed to try put him back. So long story short, the Emperor was not born a god. He did not become a god when he entered Molech, and he didn't even become a god during or before his fight with Horus, nor did he become a god when he ascended to the Golden Throne. However, at some point in the last 10,000 years, he has gained enough warp juice to tip over into godhood, with even people like Gilliman now believing the Emperor to be some sort of godlike being. It is still a debated topic within the lore itself, but more so because the definition of a god is so uncertain. Sometimes these things are more of an art than a science, but if we compare the Emperor to the other pretty established gods, such as the Elder or Chaos gods, his current form would suggest that he matches their definition. So if you were to say the Emperor was currently a god, there isn't much someone can say to debunk that. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up a Major Mini for Black Friday, 40% off store-wide. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more godlike content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.